So many of us struggle with curiosity, not because we don't value learning, but because we're afraid of being wrong, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of looking incompetent or losing credibility, and that fear often stops us from taking action at all. We stay silent, we stick with what we already believe, we repeat patterns simply because they feel safe. Recently, I read the book Think Again, and one of the central ideas stayed with me. Being wrong is not a weakness. In fact, being wrong, when paired with curiosity and openness, is one of the most powerful paths to learning and growth. The author makes the case that wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing what you don't know and being willing to update your thinking when new information appears. There's a quote that captures this perfectly. If knowledge is power, knowing we don't know is wisdom. We often celebrate certainty, but real progress comes from humility. From being willing to say, I might be wrong about this, or there may be a better way. So let me ask you this. Who do you think is more likely to succeed over time? Someone with a closed mind who clings tightly to their beliefs, or someone with an open, curious mind who is willing to reflect, question, and evolve? When we cultivate curiosity, something important happens internally. We become more capable of self-reflection. We start examining our thoughts, our decisions, and our assumptions instead of defending them automatically. Research in cognitive psychology shows that reflective thinking improves decision-making, especially in complex or uncertain situations. Curiosity allows us to pause and ask, is this actually the best approach or just the most familiar one? Humility plays a major role here. Just because something has been done the same way for years doesn't mean it's right or optimal. In fact, organizational research consistently shows that rigid adherence to so-called best practices can limit innovation. What worked yesterday may not work tomorrow. Curiosity keeps us flexible. When we're curious, we become more open to ideas that challenge our own. We stop seeing feedback as a threat and start seeing it as information. And this is important because constructive feedback, when delivered respectfully, actually increases confidence rather than diminishing it. Studies on learning orientation show that people who view feedback as data rather than judgment are more resilient, more adaptable, and more effective over time. Curiosity also sharpens our reasoning skills. When we're open to diverse perspectives, we're exposed to more information, more nuance, and more ways of thinking. We're no longer stuck in a silo. This improves cognitive flexibility, the brain's ability to shift perspectives and integrate new information, which is a key predictor of problem solving and leadership effectiveness. And curiosity doesn't just benefit us individually, it transforms how we relate to others. When we genuinely listen without rehearsing our response while the other person is speaking, we develop empathy. Neuroscience research shows that active listening activates brain regions associated with emotional understanding and social connection. In a world that desperately needs more empathy, curiosity becomes a leadership skill, not just a personality trait. There's also compelling evidence that groups and organizations perform better when multiple perspectives are welcomed. Teams with cognitive and experiential diversity consistently outperform homogeneous teams financially and creatively. Why? Because different viewpoints reduce blind spots. When ideas are challenged respectfully, stronger solutions emerge. The same principle applies to our personal lives. We can live inside our own mental echo chamber, or we can allow curiosity to expand our understanding of the world and ourselves. In Think Again, the author describes 4 common mindsets we tend to adopt. There's the preacher mindset, where we confidently share our beliefs but rarely listen. The prosecutor mindset, where we focus on finding flaws in others' arguments. The politician mindset, where we prioritize approval and consensus over truth. And then there's the scientist mindset, the most effective one. The scientist mindset is grounded in curiosity. Scientists don't cling to ideas simply because they're familiar or personally meaningful. They ask questions, they look at data, they test assumptions, and most importantly, they're willing to change their minds when the evidence changes. Adopting this mindset isn't always easy because there are real psychological barriers. Many of us are uncomfortable with change. Uncertainty triggers anxiety. We also form emotional attachments to our beliefs. Beliefs often become part of our identity. Letting go of them can feel like losing a piece of ourselves. Cognitive biases add another layer. There's confirmation bias, where we seek information that supports what we already believe. There's desirability bias, where we see what we want to see. There's the first instinct fallacy, where initial impressions feel more trustworthy than later evidence. And there's binary thinking, where we oversimplify complex problems into black and white categories, even when reality is far more nuanced. One powerful quote addresses this directly. A hallmark of wisdom is knowing when it's time to abandon some of our most treasured tools and some of the most cherished parts of our identity. Growth requires letting go. So, how do we actually build a more curious mind? One strategy is shifting from asking why to asking how. Instead of defending why something should work, explore how it actually works in practice. Another is strengthening mental agility by deliberately questioning your own ideas. For every belief or project, try identifying one thing that might be wrong or incomplete. This isn't self-criticism, it's intellectual honesty. Building a challenge network also matters. These are people who are willing to question you respectfully rather than simply reassure you. Research on innovation shows that progress accelerates when ideas are stress tested in psychologically safe environments. Polite agreement feels good, but thoughtful challenge helps us grow. Curiosity also shows up in how we communicate. Motivational interviewing techniques, used extensively in behavioral science, emphasize asking open-ended questions, listening deeply, and understanding the other person's perspective before responding. This approach reduces defensiveness and increases mutual understanding. When disagreement arises, curiosity becomes even more important. Seek understanding before persuasion. Focus on a small number of key points rather than overwhelming the conversation. And ask questions like, "Can you help me understand how you see this?" That single question can transform conflict into collaboration. Finally, curiosity thrives in environments of psychological safety. We learn best when we feel respected, not judged, when we know we can ask questions, admit uncertainty, and change our minds without punishment. So I'll leave you with this. Curiosity isn't about having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to keep asking better questions. Tell me, what does having a curious mind mean to you? Cognitive biases add another layer. There's confirmation bias, where we seek information that supports what we already believe. There's desirability bias, where we see what we want to see. There's the first instinct fallacy, where initial impressions feel more trustworthy than later evidence. And there's binary thinking, where we oversimplify complex problems into black and white categories, even when reality is far more nuanced. Grab my free leadership workbook, 5 Steps to Communicate with Calm, Clarity, and Confidence, at powerofpeacefulness.com. Until next time, take a deep breath, embrace the present moment, and keep walking your path to peace.